Tiny presents The Psychology of Human Misjudgment by Charlie Munger, investor, lawyer, and business partner of Warren Buffett.
Well, I am very interested in the subject of human misjudgment. I don't have too much interest in teaching other people how to get rich. And that isn't because I fear the competition. I saw this patterned irrationality, which was so extreme, and I had no theory or anything to deal with it. I just started to create my own system of psychology, partly by casual reading, but largely from personal experience. And I used that pattern to help me get through life. I'd like to share that with you. Standard causes of human misjudgment. First, simple psychological denial. This first really hit me between the eyes when a friend of our family had a super athlete, super student son who flew off a carrier in the North Atlantic and never came back. And his mother, who was a very sane woman, just never believed he was dead. Simple psychological denial. The reality is too painful to bear, so you just distort it until it's bearable. We all do that to some extent, and it's a common psychological misjudgment that causes terrible problems. Agency costs. Here, my early experience was a doctor who thought that the gallbladder was the source of all medical evil, and that if you really loved your patients, you couldn't get that organ out rapidly enough. He sent bushel baskets full of normal gallbladders down to the pathology lab in a leading hospital in Lincoln, Nebraska. Human nature causes this terrible abuse. So you're getting your advice in this world from your paid advisor with this huge load of ghastly bias. You can hire your advisor and then just apply a windage factor, like I used to do when I was a rifle shooter. You just adjust for so many miles an hour of wind. You can learn the basic elements of your advisor's trade. You don't have to learn very much, by the way, because you learn just a little, and you can make him explain why he's right. Bias from consistency and commitment tendency. And this is a superpower in error-causing psychological tendency. The human mind is a lot like the human egg, and the human egg has a shut-off device. When sperm gets in, it shuts down so the next one can't get in. The human mind has a big tendency of the same sort. And here again, it doesn't just catch ordinary mortals, it catches the deans of physics. According to Max Planck, the really innovative, important new physics was never really accepted by the old guard. Instead, a new guard came along that was less brain-blocked by its previous conclusions. And if Max Planck's crowd had this commitment tendency in spite of disconfirming evidence, you can imagine what the crowd that you and I are part of behaves like. And of course, if you make a public disclosure of your conclusion, you're pounding it in to your own head. Many of these students that are screaming at us, they aren't convincing us, but they're forming mental chains for themselves because what they're shouting out, they're pounding in. Bias from Pavlovian association, misconstruing past correlation as a reliable basis for decision making. I never took a course in psychology or economics either, for that matter, but I did learn about Pavlov in high school biology. So the dog salivated when the bell rang. So what? The Pavlovian association is an enormously powerful psychological force in the daily life of all of us. I'd say 3/4 of advertising works on pure Pavlov. Take Coca-Cola Company. They want to be associated with every wonderful image. Heroics in the Olympics, wonderful music, you name it. They don't want to be associated with presidents' funerals. When have you seen a Coca-Cola ad associated with bad psychologically rooted tendencies? All these psychological tendencies work largely or entirely on a subconscious level, which makes them very insidious. Talking about economics, you've got two products. Now, you think under the laws of economics that if product A costs X plus something, if product B costs X minus something, it will sell better than if it sells at X plus something. But that's not so. In many cases, when you raise the price of the alternative product, it'll get a larger market share than it would when you make it lower than your competitor's product. Pure old Pavlov and his dog. Bias from reciprocation tendency, including the tendency of one in a role to act as other persons expect. It is so easy to be a patsy, the compliance practitioners of this life. Cialdini demonstrated this by running around a campus, and he asked people to take delinquents to the zoo. 1 in 6 actually agreed to do it. And after he'd accumulated the statistical output, he went around on the same campus and he asked other people, would you devote 2 afternoons a week? And there he got 100% of the people to say no. But after he'd made the first request, he backed off a little. He said, well, would you at least take them to the zoo 1 afternoon? He raised the compliance rate to a half. He got 3 times the success by just going through the little ask for a lot and back off. Now, if the human mind on a subconscious level can be manipulated that way, and you don't know it, I always use the phrase, you're like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. Over-influenced by social proof, that is, the conclusions of others, particularly under conditions of natural uncertainty and stress. And here, one of the cases the psychologist used is Kitty Genovese, where all these people, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 of them just sort of sat and did nothing while she was slowly murdered. One of the explanations is that everybody looked at everybody else and nobody else was doing anything, and so there's automatic social proof that the right thing to do is nothing. That's only part of it. Big shot businessmen get into these waves of social proof. Do you remember some years ago when one oil company bought a fertilizer company? And every other major oil company practically ran out and bought a fertilizer company. And there was no more damn reason for all these oil companies to buy fertilizer companies. But they didn't know exactly what to do, and if Exxon was doing it, it was good enough for Mobil or vice versa. And of course, it was a total disaster. What I always call man with a hammer syndrome. To the man with a hammer, every problem tends to look pretty much like a nail. Bias from contrast cause distortions of sensation, perception, and cognition. Here, the great experiment that Cialdini does in his class is he takes 3 buckets of water. One's hot, one's cold, and one's room temperature. He has the student stick his left hand in the hot water and his right hand in the cold water. Then he has them remove the hands and put them both in the room temperature bucket. And of course, with both hands in the same bucket of water, one seems hot and the other seems cold, because the sensation apparatus of man is over-influenced by contrast. It has no absolute scale. Maybe you've had a magician remove your watch without your noticing it. I certainly have. It's the same thing. He's taking advantage of contrast. Cognition mimics sensation, and the cognition manipulators mimic the watch-removing magician. Cialdini cites the case of the real estate broker. You got the rube that's been transferred into your town, and the first thing you do is you take the rube out to 2 of the most awful overpriced houses you've ever seen. And then you take the rube to some moderately overpriced house, and then you stick them. And you think you're immune from these things, and you laugh, and I want to tell you, you aren't. My favorite analogy, I have this friend I like to play bridge with. He said, Charlie, he says, if you throw a frog into hot water, the frog will jump out. But if you put the frog in room temperature water and just slowly heat the water up, the frog will die there. Now, I don't know whether that's true about a frog, but it sure as hell true about many of the businessmen I know. Bias from over-influence by authority. Well, here the Milgram experiment had a person posing as an authority figure trick ordinary people into giving what they had every reason to expect was heavy torture by electric shock to perfectly innocent fellow citizens. He was trying to show why Hitler succeeded and a few other things. Milgram, it's been widely interpreted as mere obedience. But the truth of the matter is, the experimenter who got the students to give the heavy shocks in Milgram, he explained why. It was a false explanation. We need this to look for scientific truth and so on. That greatly changed the behavior of the people. And you'll like this one. You got a pilot and a co-pilot. The pilot is the authority figure. They don't do this in airplanes, but they've done it in simulators. They have the pilot to do something where the co-pilot would know the plane was going to crash. But the pilot's doing it, and the pilot is the authority figure. 25% of the time, the plane crashes. Bias from deprival superreaction syndrome, caused by present or threatened scarcity, removal of something almost possessed but never possessed. Here I took the Munger dog, lovely, harmless dog. The only way to get that dog to bite you was to try and take something out of its mouth after it was already there. And the human version of that dog is there in all of us. People are really crazy about minor decrements down. If you act on them, you get into reciprocation tendency, because you don't just reciprocate affection, you reciprocate animosity. The extreme business case here was New Coke. Now, Coca-Cola has the most valuable trademark in the world. Coke has armies of brilliant engineers, lawyers, psychologists, advertising executives, and so forth. And they'd spent the better part of 100 years getting people to believe that trademark had all these intangible values too. And people associated it with a flavor. And so they were going to tell people not that it was improved, because you can't improve a flavor. If a flavor is a matter of taste, I mean, you may improve a detergent or something, but telling you're going to make a major change in a flavor. I mean, so they got this huge deprival super reaction syndrome. Pepsi was within weeks of coming out with old Coke in a Pepsi bottle, which would have been the biggest fiasco in modern times. Bias from envy, jealousy. Well, envy, jealousy made what, 2 out of the 10 commandments? Here again, you go through the psychology survey courses. You go to the index. Envy, jealousy, 1,000-page book. It's blank. There's some blind spots in academia. I've heard Warren say 6 times, it's not greed that drives the world, but envy. Bias from chemical dependency. Well, we don't have to talk about that. We've all seen so much of it, but it's interesting how it always causes moral breakdown if there's any need, and always involves massive denial. Bias from misgambling compulsion. For instance, a lottery. You have a lottery where you get your number by lot, and then somebody draws a number by lot. It gets lousy play. You get a lottery where people get to pick their number. Get big play. The minute they picked it themselves, it gets an extra validity. After all, they thought it and they acted on it. And look at what's happening to our country. Every Indian reservation, every river town, and look at the people who were ruined by it. Then you take slot machines, you get bar, lemon. That happens again and again and again. You get all these near misses. Well, that's deprival super reaction syndrome. And boy, do the people who create the machines understand human psychology. Bias from liking distortion, including the tendency to especially like oneself, one's own kind, and one's own idea structures, and the tendency to be especially susceptible to being misled by someone liked. Disliking distortion, the reciprocal of liking distortion, and the tendency not to learn appropriately from someone disliked. Hugely powerful tendencies. Man with a hammer syndrome revisited. He believes that his own idea structures will cure cancer, and he believes that the demons that he's the guardian against are the biggest demons and the most important ones, and in fact they may be very small demons compared to the demons that you face. Other normal limitations of sensation, memory, cognition, and knowledge, well, I don't have time for that. Stress-induced mental changes. Here my favorite example is the great Pavlov, and he had all these dogs in cages which had all been conditioned into changed behaviors. And the great Leningrad flood came, and it just went right up, and the dog's in a cage, and the dog had as much stress as you can imagine a dog ever having. And the water receded in time to save some of the dogs, and Pavlov noted that they had a total reversal of their conditioned personality. Being the great scientist he was, he spent the rest of his life giving nervous breakdowns to dogs. The thought system indicated by this list of psychological tendencies has great value, not widely recognized and employed. What should the educational system do about it? I am not going to answer that one now. I like leaving a little mystery.